Chapter 1473. Hiding in the tower days passed in a strange mix of idleness and tension. Alethia's island had always been like a misty hell, but now, that hell was boiling, even secreted away inside the tower. The members of the cohort could feel the echoes of the harrowing clashes between the abominable nightmare creatures. These fiends had been caught by the island across many centuries, but now that the loop was destroyed, they were eradicating each other with terrifying speed. Of course, undying slaughter and devouring beast were at the forefront of the massacre. Sonny caught glimpses of the two from time to time. His shadows were always keeping an eye on the outside world. With the mist growing thinner with each day, the landscape of Alethia's island gradually cleared, so, by now, he could see a good chunk of the ancient forest from the top of the tower. The lumbering shape of the bestial giantess was easily noticed. Undying slaughter was much harder to spot, but he could clearly see the death throes of her victims. For now, nothing seemed to be able to prevail against the two defiled saints, to his disappointment. He would have preferred to see the two plagues killed by the powerful nightmare creatures residing on the island. If they perished, there would be no need for the cohort to stay. Sonny and his companions would be able to return to the chain breaker and slip away into the darkness at the heart of the vortex. But of course, reality was not that convenient. Speaking of his companions, each of them was recuperating in their own manner. Nephi's was replenishing her soul essence with stunning speed and spent most of her time training. Her singular devotion to her sword seemed almost obsessive by now. Cassie had disappeared into the spherical chamber of Alethia's tower, where she was supposed to be studying the runes. And she did do that, of course, but somehow, Sonny felt that the blind girl mostly went there to be alone. That was why she only returned above ground to eat meals prepared by Nephi's and sleep. Most of the time, it was easy to forget that she was even with them. Effie and Jet were perhaps the most tired of them all. They had experienced months of battling dangerous nightmare creatures across the great river, the tragic destruction of their nomadic tribe, the escape from the swarm of the drowned, and the horrors of Alethia's island without ever having a moment to catch their breaths. So these days of hiding inside the tower were the first real opportunity to rest they had received since entering the nightmare. The two women mostly relaxed and remained idle. Sonny spent some time with Effie, describing his own experiences in the tomb of Ariel and sharing valuable knowledge. Jet also listened, sometimes offering her opinion or asking questions, but mostly she just looked deeply and comfortably asleep. Sonny was baffled about how someone could sleep so much, but after remembering how overworked Soul Reaper had usually looked since the first day they met, he just figured that she was catching up on nap time after a decade of being worked to the bone by the government. It really said a lot that she could only get enough sleep, inside a nightmare. Jet was consuming the fruits of the sacred tree to replenish her dwindling essence. For now, it looked like there were enough of the succulent golden fruits to last her a long while. She even shared a couple with Effie, partially because the huntress was drooling a lot when Soul Reaper ate, and partially because, according to Jet, it could be good for the baby. Sonny wasn't sure what she meant, but he wasn't going to complain. As for himself, he had tried to stay idle for the first day, but quickly grew bored with doing nothing. Or rather, the memories of his gruesome death were too vivid when Sonny was not doing anything, so he quickly found something to do. Of course, that something was weaving. Now that Sonny had 5 Supreme Soul Shards to spare, he could start thinking about how to empower the cohort best. He had a few ideas but was not confident yet. He needed some practice first. In order to test his theories, Sonny made a few simple alterations to his weaker memories. For example, he managed to transplant the Blessing of Spirit, the enchantment enhancing recovery from mental fatigue, from the Shroud of Dusk to the Puppeteer's Shroud. He did not even have to add an additional nexus to his first memory armor, because it already possessed 5, but only two relatively light enchantments. Additionally, the Blessing of Spirit suited the original shroud well, considering that its doubtless enchantment also had to do with protecting the mind. In the same manner, he transplanted the Blessing of Flesh, the enchantment that enhanced recovery from physical fatigue, to the Endless Spring. Now, not only could the beautiful glass bottle provide a near-infinite supply of water, but drinking that water was also especially invigorating. Sunny also made another attempt to master the unseen enchantment of the Moonlight Shard. That single enchantment, which allowed the ghostly stiletto to be summoned instantly, could qualitatively change every memory in his arsenal. Sadly, it remained unattainable and elusive. He often felt that he was almost there, but at the last moment, the weave always slipped from his fingers. These were all minor projects, though. His true desire, the white whale Sunny continued to pursue, had little to do with memories. Instead, it had to do with echoes. He had already studied Cassie's blade mannequin before, but now he also asked her to lend him the quiet dancer. By comparing the two echoes, one created by the enchanters of Clan Valor, the other by the spell, Sunny was able to learn many new things and come to several tentative conclusions. He felt that creating an echo was still far beyond him, or at least too time-consuming to try. However, Sunny came up with a crazy idea. What if, instead of creating an echo, he could convert a memory into one? The quiet dancer was already similar to a sentient weapon. Sunny did not know how to weave a semblance of sentience. He did not know how to even approach learning something like that either. But he also did not need to. Anyone else would, but he already had something to substitute artificial sentience with. The true sentience of the silent shadows dwelling within the darkness of his soul. If he could change the weave of a memory to that of an echo, even if the resulting echo lacked the most important quality, the false spark of life to animate it, his aspect could theoretically allow him to convert the defective echo into a perfectly fine shadow, given that the original memory and the dark spirit shared the same source and were thus compatible. Or at least, that was his theory. Truly, Sunny had no idea what kind of a monster such an experiment would create. Nevertheless, he set his eyes on the covetous coffer, which already possessed a few qualities necessary for an echo, and shared some qualities with the quiet dancer as well. The shadow of the mordant mimic was there, in Sunny's soul, so he decided to make it his test subject. He was only starting to consider how to go about making the coffer into a partial echo, though, when something unexpected happened. As he was coaxing the temperamental rapier into staying still and letting him study her weave, the entire tower suddenly shook. What the hell? Instantly tense, Sunny looked away from the quiet dancer and outstretched his hand, ready to summon the sin of solace. His first thought was to shadow step into the hidden chamber below the floor of the tower. The tower was shaking, and Cassie was there, at the heart of Alethia's sorcery. Cassie had also been rather mysterious lately, unpredictable. However, a moment later he shook his head, feeling slightly ashamed. Why was he suspecting the blind girl? It was his first reaction even. Instead, Sunny concentrated on his shadows and took a closer look outside. What he saw made his expression darken. What is happening? Jet had woken up from her nap and was now looking at him, a deep scowl on her face. Effie had almost lost her balance when the tower shook, and was now holding her belly, alert. Nephi's had jumped down from where she had been carving more meat from the corpse of the great tyrant, white sparks igniting in her striking gray eyes. Sunny hesitated for a moment. Outside the tower, the ancient pines were swaying, which meant that it was not just Alethia's tower that had shaken, it was the entire island. Damnation! Sunny noticed Cassie appearing from the stairs to the hidden chamber and answered. I'm not sure, but I think something happened in the port. Apart from the deadly circle of black obelisks, there was only one place built by Alethia they had never visited on the island, the port. which was enveloped by green vines and turned into a nest by an especially dreadful nightmare creature. The ancient building was not included in the plan Sonny and Cassie had made, because there was nothing they needed there. In truth, the port had nothing to do with the time loop, the protective enchantments of the tower, or their way to freedom. It did serve an important role, though. It was there that the mechanism keeping Alethia's island in the air was located. So, unless Sonny wanted to drop the entire island into the vortex, there was no need to fight the current master of the port and enter there. But he had never thought that the mechanism would be damaged in the extinction war between the prisoners of the island. It had remained intact for countless centuries and was never damaged in any of the revolutions. What kind of terrible might would an abomination have to possess to breach the impregnable defenses of the ancient enchantment? One particular horror came to mind. The devouring beast, it had to be her. For a few moments, Sonny was filled with cold terror. However, noticing that the island was not plummeting into the dark abyss, he calmed down a little. I don't think that the damage dealt to the levitation mechanism is serious. It was probably just shaken a little. Just then the tower trembled again. This time the tremor was not as powerful, but they still felt it. Neff's expression grew bleak. Still, it's not good news for us. The island was not falling yet, but who was to say that it would not in the future? Sonny sighed. Yeah, we should probably accelerate our plans. The members of the cohort looked at each other. The meaning of his words was simple. Sonny was telling them that the inevitable battle with the plagues, which they had all been dreading and preparing for during this short period of peace, was now almost upon them. Cassie sighed. I feel like we have at least a couple more days. Staying on the island for longer might be dangerous. Sonny nodded. Then we'll make our move in 2 days, for better or worse. He had already told his companions all he knew about the 2 defiled saints. They had already discussed every possible strategy. Now, all they had to do was prepare themselves mentally and venture out into the mist one last time. Jet sighed and walked over to the covetous coffer. I better stop saving those fruits then. She was right. Before, they thought that they would try to stay in the tower for as long as possible. Now, however, there was a clear limit to how much time they had. She still had a few of the golden fruits to spare, so absorbing as much essence as possible in preparation for the fight was more important than buying time. Soon, everyone got busy making their final preparations. Sonny, meanwhile, continued to monitor the outside. The island quaked several more times in the next 2 days. The mist, too, grew very thin, allowing him to see far and wide. And what Sonny saw was truly stunning. Now that Alethia's island had almost lost the obscuring veil of mist, it resembled a ravaged battlefield. The forest of the ancient pines was almost completely gone. Most of the trees had been shattered or toppled, carpeting the ground like brambles. Here and there, gargantuan corpses lay, surrounded by vast pools of blood. Some of them were terribly torn apart and partially devoured, others were eerily intact. The few landmarks he remembered were either erased or misshapen and unrecognizable. Not too far away, a single broken wing of the hollow butterfly lay on the ground, but the rest of the great monster was nowhere to be seen. It seemed that he had underestimated the primal fury of the nightmare creatures imprisoned on the island. By now, there were only a handful of them, the most dreadful and powerful, left. Sonny saw several chilling scenes as well. The most terrible of them happened at the dawn of the second day, when the towering shape of devouring beast appeared from afar. The bestial giantess was moving slowly. Then, however, she suddenly froze and looked up. Countless tendrils descended from the cloudy sky, assaulting her like a tide. Each of them was hundreds of meters long and tremendously powerful, enough so to send shivers running down Sonny's spine. Devouring beast swatted away several of the tendrils, but several more wrapped around her arms, her waist, and her neck, both strangling the defiled saint and trying to lift her off the ground. Sunny even felt a sliver of hope that she would be killed by the dreadful horror of the sky, the harvester. A frenzied howl shook the world. Grinning madly, the bestial giantess sank her teeth into one of the tendrils, then strained her muscles and grabbed those that were entangling her arms. Bending at the waist, she growled and pulled the creature hiding in the clouds down. The ground under her feet exploded, turning into a deep crater. As Sunny watched in shock, a revolting creature descended from the sky, forcefully thrown down. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a mass of wriggling flesh that looked like a tattered sail from afar, or a dark star that emanated fleshy tentacles instead of rays of light. Dozens more tendrils shot toward devouring beast, but before they could trap her, the giantess suddenly crouched and then jumped. Soaring hundreds of meters into the air, she tore into the harvester with her fingers and then plummeted down while grasping it in her hands. Not long after that, the horror of the skis was completely savaged, its tendrils torn and devoured, its grotesque body mutilated beyond recognition. The defiled saint received many terrible wounds, but her enemy was entirely destroyed. Less than a dozen minutes later, the harvester was no more. Hidden inside the tower, Sunny trembled. His heart felt heavy. Letting out a quiet sigh, he closed his eyes and whispered, "That thing does not seem hungry at all." By the end of the day, Alethia's island had grown silent. It was still shaking from time to time, the quakes growing stronger each time, which meant that the sorcery keeping the island afloat was slowly coming undone. But its surface had become strangely peaceful. Sunny was pretty sure that, apart from the motionless nightmare creatures on the stone bridge, there were only two abominations left on the entire island, devouring beast and undying slaughter. The former was messily consuming the remains of the dreadful fiends in the obliterated forest. Deep wounds were covering her towering body, but the bestial giantess did not seem affected by her flaw yet. The latter had just broken free from the circle of black obelisks, shattering most of them in the process. Whatever horror had dwelled within the circle was now dead, while undying slaughter, she, at least, appeared to be running low on essence. Sunny could not see much from his observation post at the top of the tower, and he did not even dare to look at the defiled saints directly, afraid that they would sense his gaze. But he could tell that battling the being that had been imprisoned by the black obelisks took a lot out of the hateful mist wraith. Undying slaughter had a more cruel flaw than the bestial giantess. Not only was her essence constantly being drained, but she also had to spend it while fighting powerful opponents. As a result, her entire existence was a perilous balancing act. And right now, the mist wraith was out of balance. Sunny watched as she prowled the island, searching for new victims. She even approached the tower and spent some time observing the nightmare creatures on the bridge. In the end, however, undying slaughter backed away and disappeared into the mist. She's running out of time. Sunny felt a spark of hope ignite in his heart. Come dawn, the cohort was going to leave the tower and face the defiled saints in battle. The weaker their enemies would become, the better their chances of survival were going to be. Still, he did not feel confident. If anything, Sunny felt that they would be marching to their deaths. Maybe we should rethink our plans and try to escape stealthily instead. There was still a little bit of time left. He would try to talk some sense into Nephi's in the morning. Sunny continued to monitor the island until dawn, dreading the next day. He could imagine killing one of the defiled saints. With him and Nephi's working together, both being terrors, with Jet's lethal aspect, Cassie and Effie supporting them from the back, Saint and Fiend holding the vanguard positions, and Nightmare affecting the enemy with his insidious powers, there was a chance. Most importantly, he possessed the most precious advantage, detailed knowledge of what the two plagues were capable of, and experience fighting them. However, Sunny could not imagine surviving a battle against both abominable fiends at the same time, no matter how drained and heavily wounded they were. At the very brink of dawn, when he was wondering if there was a way to separate them for a sufficiently long period of time, there was suddenly movement in the shattered forest. Sunny was distracted from his heavy thoughts and peered into the distance through one of his shadows. What is she doing? Out there in the mist, devouring beast suddenly froze and let go of the horribly mutilated corpse of a nightmare creature she had been chewing. The ghastly carcass fell down, sending a cloud of dust and splinters into the air. With blood streaming down her face, the colossal giantess looked down coldly. It was only then that Sunny noticed another figure standing some distance away from her, this one much smaller. Undying Slaughter was obscured by the mist, but now that it had become much thinner, the wraith was easier to spot. Not that she was hiding. On the contrary, it was as though she wanted to be noticed. Undying Slaughter did not look that well. Her elusive figure seemed even less substantial than usual, as if on the verge of dissipating into a wisp of fog. The two defiled saints stared at each other silently for a while. Sunny did not know if they were capable of communicating with each other, or if they needed to. From what he could tell, there was an unspoken understanding between these harrowing abominations. Eventually, Devouring Beast grinned wickedly, revealing her bloodied teeth. They are going too. His eyes widened slightly. At the same time, a ghostly blade appeared in Undying Slaughter's hand, and she moved forward. It seemed there was no loyalty among the defiled. The battle against the prisoners of Alethia's island should have been like a feast for Undying Slaughter, but those harrowing abominations had not been weak. In fact, most of them had been superior to the Mist Wraith both in terms of class and rank. So, she had ended up burning more essence than she received by killing them. Which was why she needed to absorb more, and the only creature she could kill by now was the other defiled saint, Devouring Beast. The two plagues were going to clash with each other, and, as if answering their fury, the whole island shuddered. This time, the tremor was violent enough to throw Sunny down to the stone floor. This is our chance. The other members of the cohort had been checking their equipment, almost ready to leave the tower. However, Sunny saw an opportunity, so he turned to them and shouted, "We need to go now." It was going to take some time to get to where Undying Slaughter and Devouring Beast were fighting. By then, one of the plagues would already be dead, and there was not going to be a better moment to attack the remaining one than immediately after the battle was over. Not unless they wanted to risk staying on the island until it collapsed into the vortex, at least. The members of the cohort looked at Sunny, then exploded with motion. A few moments later, they were already passing through the gateway of Alethia's tower. Out there in the distance, the defiled saints collided. Devouring Beast's towering figure shimmered and then suddenly disappeared. Instead of a dreadful giantess, a savage-looking woman appeared amidst the toppled trees. Her skin painted by dirt and blood, she must have realized that her size would only be a disadvantage when fighting the Mist Wraith, and so transformed back into the semblance of a human. Her human form, however, possessed astonishing strength, explosive speed, and ferocious might. Even Undying Slaughter seemed to tremble in front of Devouring Beast's primal fury. However, Effie's evil twin did not possess means of attacking intangible beings. Nevertheless, she was more than capable of dodging and evading the Wraith's attacks, and remaining in the form of an apparition was costing Undying Slaughter essence. In the end, the Mist Wraith had no choice but to abandon her ghostly form and face her sister as a creature of flesh, blood, and bone. That was the last thing Sunny saw before commanding his shadow to abandon its crow's nest on the top floor of the tower and race to catch up to the cohort. He could not allow himself to leave any of his helpers behind. In the upcoming battle, he was going to need every drop of his strength. You know what to do. As the cohort was climbing down the narrow steps, Sonny jumped into Nightmare's saddle, commanded his shadows to augment the black stallion, and rushed forward on his own. For a moment, it felt as if they were falling, but then his steed landed at the base of the cliff, took a sharp turn, and avoided the stone bridge by leaping over the moat. Landing on the other side of the wide chasm, Nightmare flew in the direction where the two defiled saints were fighting. The wind whistled in Sonny's ears. And then, just as he was about to reach the vicinity of the dreadful clash, the island quaked once more, and a terrible wail assaulted his ears. Diving out of the mist, Sonny ordered Nightmare to stop and looked forward with wide eyes, his face turning white as a sheet of paper. Out there in front of him, surrounded by signs of terrible destruction, a tall, bestial woman was laying on the ground, her face covered by blood. Her whole body was trembling. Sonny thought that devouring beast was afraid, but then he heard a strange, chilling sound. She was laughing. A ghastly, mad laughter escaped from between her bloodied teeth, full of wicked glee. It only grew quiet when Undying Slaughter, who was standing above the savage woman with a cold expression on her dreadfully beautiful face, ruthlessly plunged her ghostly blade into her sister's chest. Devouring Beast, heralds of the estuary, one of the 6 defiled champions of Verge, died just like that, slain to satiate another plague's hunger. They are the 5 plagues now, I guess. For a moment, Sonny was frozen in place, struggling to believe his luck. Then Undying Slaughter retracted her blade, turned slightly, and looked directly at him. There was doom and inevitability in her emotionless, inhuman, piercing blue eyes. He was suddenly very, very cold. The memory of that first harrowing death on Alethia's island resurfaced in his mind, making Sonny shudder violently. Not this time, wretch. Struggling against the instinctual terror, he met Undying Slaughter's chilling gaze. And smiled. Sonny felt that they had gotten incredibly lucky. There was always a chance that Undying Slaughter and Devouring Beast would turn on each other, but he had not dared to rely on that possibility. But now, one of the plagues was dead. That said, the situation was not ideal. Sonny would have preferred if it was Undying Slaughter that had perished. The best possible outcome, however, would have been if he had arrived just before their battle ended and stole the kill from the Mist Wraith. Then not only would one of the defiled saints have died, but the other would have also been deprived of absorbing her essence. Killing Undying Slaughter then would have been much easier. But although their luck was good, it was not that good. As things stood now, Undying Slaughter had just replenished her dwindling essence. Sonny did not know how much of it she had gotten exactly, but it had to be a substantial amount. Devouring Beast had been a mighty abomination. After all, her corrupted soul had to have been extremely potent. So, while the Mist Wraith was not in her peak state, she was also more than powerful enough to eliminate the cohort now. That's all right. They had planned for such an eventuality as well. Sonny had fought with Undying Slaughter many times. He had done so alone, supported by his shadows, and even with the help of the other members of the cohort. He had died in agony each time. For that reason, their goal today was not to be to overpower and slay the dreadful Wraith. She was too powerful for them to prevail against her in a battle, which did not mean that they could not win. Instead of trying to defeat Undying Slaughter, what they needed to do was tie her down in a prolonged confrontation. It was just how Sonny had imagined killing someone like Jet. The key to doing so was to force her to exhaust her essence while not giving her a chance to replenish it. Which was why this battle of theirs was going to be a battle of attrition. Still smiling, Sonny mockingly saluted Undying Slaughter with the sin of solace, and then gave Nightmare a mental command to flee. The dark destrier turned and shot back the way they had come, splinters and bits of soil flying from under his adamantine hooves. Of course, The mist wraith was not going to let a source of essence escape that easily. Almost at the same moment, she lunged forward in pursuit. Nightmare was incredibly fast. In fact, Sunny doubted that there were many creatures of the same rank faster than his tenebrous steed. However, to his horror, Undying Slaughter was not much slower. Even though the dark destrier was augmented by the shadows, the distance between him and the mist wraith was remaining the same. It was even dwindling slowly. Just what kind of monster is she? Sunny was not too disheartened, though. After all, he did not really want to escape from Undying Slaughter. Instead, he wanted to lure her into the trap that the cohort had prepared. Soon, he was almost back to the tower. The dreadful enemy was right on his heels. It's now or never. Before Undying Slaughter could attack, Sunny dismissed Nightmare and fell to the ground. Instead of hitting it, however, he simply dissolved into the shadows and stepped out of them on the other side of the moat, rolling down the stone steps for a moment until Nephi's caught him. The cohort was currently in front of the entrance to the stone bridge. Or rather, Nephi's, Jet, Saint, and Fiend were there with Sunny. Cassie and Effie were much higher up the cliff, standing on the stone steps far above them. Effie's spear was already flying down. Nephi's was helping Sunny stand up when the spear hit the slope of the cliff with the force of a tactical missile. The whole cliff shuddered, sending him tumbling down once again, and a deafening boom spread from the point of impact, accompanied by the cracking noise of breaking stone. A large part of the slope simply shattered, stone debris flying in the air, and slid down into the dark chasm of the moat. With it, of course, a number of ancient runes that had been carved into the cliff were destroyed. The enchantment protecting the bridge was broken at that moment. Out there on the opposite end of the bridge, the nightmare creatures that had been frozen before shuddered, released from the invisible trap. And just as they did, Undying Slaughter appeared from the mist, her glacial blue eyes burning from dreadful, cold killing intent. Before she could even react, the former prisoners of the stone bridge lunged at her, overcome by bloodlust and fury. A corrupted tyrant, a corrupted terror, a great beast. Finally managing to stand up, Sunny leaned on Nephi's and looked across the bridge. The released abominations had already clashed with Undying Slaughter, the whole island shaking from the dreadful force of their clash. Or maybe it was simply quaking, because the enchantment keeping it in the air was failing. He exhaled slowly. So far, so good. If there was anything they could do to drain Undying Slaughter's essence before facing her themselves, they had to do it. Of course, it was a dangerous gamble. The nightmare creatures that had been trapped on the bridge could force the mist wraith to burn through her precious essence, but they could also become her victims, fueling her defiled soul. In fact, before a single minute passed, one of the abominations already looked like it was close to death. Just a split second before Undying Slaughter could finish it off, though a bone javelin suddenly fell from the sky, piercing the nightmare creature's neck and impaling it on the ground. The ghostly blade bit into the massive body of the abomination a moment later, easily passing through its armor. But it was for naught. There was no soul for the mist wraith to destroy because the creature was already dead. The bone javelin had killed it instantly. Feeling a dark grin twist his lips, Sunny looked up. There, high above, Cassie and Effie were still standing on the stone steps. There were a dozen more javelins laying on the ground in front of the vigorous huntress. These javelins had been made from the ribs of the great tyrant. Of course, in normal circumstances, it would have been hard for Effie to slay nightmare creature of such dire power with one blow. But when they were already almost dead from Undying Slaughter's attacks, that was much easier. As for knowing the exact moment when to attack, after the abomination had grown weak from its wounds, but before the mist wraith could deliver the fatal blow, Cassie was there to help. With her ability to perceive several seconds into the future, she could tell Effie just when to throw the javelins and who to aim for. Together, they were in a perfect position to achieve a simple, but vitally important task. Deny undying slaughter any essence. The two of them were already accomplishing that task splendidly. Sunny knew how terrifying undying slaughter was, better than most, perhaps even better than anyone. And yet, even he was astonished by the sight of the dreadful mist wraith slaughtering the former prisoners of the stone bridge. Each of them was an opponent Sunny would not want to face in battle. Some he had a good chance of defeating, but others were absolutely lethal existences to a master, even an ascended terror like him. Nevertheless, all of them had been ruthlessly and methodically brought down by the defiled saint. It was as if no amount of physical might, impregnable armor, and unholy powers could deter her. The ghostly blade danced in the mist, and following its elusive movements, the souls of the harrowing nightmare creatures were snuffed out one after another. Or rather, they would have been, if not for Effie and Cassie. Each time undying slaughter was about to kill one of her enemies, a bone javelin would inevitably fall from the sky, stealing the creature's life moments before the mist wraith delivered the last strike. Guided by the blind seer, Effie had not missed once, which meant that all the essence the defiled saint was spending to fight against the group of powerful abominations could not be replenished by absorbing their broken souls. With each moment, she was growing weaker. Their plan was working. The last to fall was a great beast that resembled a black hound with 7 serpentine tails. Its lean, muscular body towered above undying slaughter like a dark hill, and its power was dreadful enough to make the ground crack and collapse into the chasm of the empty moat. The abominable hound was like a living nightmare, its frenzied eyes burning with eerie green flames. Despite it all, neither its terrifying jaws nor its 7 tails managed to strike the elusive mist wraith. Moving with the graceless elegance of an emotionless butcher, undying slaughter delivered the great beast 2 swift, cruel blows. The hound staggered after the first one, then grew slow and lethargic after the second. The green flames burning in its eyes dimmed, and before the third blow landed, a bone javelin pierced one of them. The monstrous black hound was thrown down by the force of the impact, making the island shake, and grew still. Viscous, red liquid flowed from its maw. On the slope of the cliff, Effie let out a shaky breath and swayed lightly. Her legs gave out, and if Cassie had not caught her in time, the huntress would have fallen down. The blind girl helped her sit down on the stone steps. These past few minutes had taken a lot out of Effie. Even though she was far from the terrible battlefield, she had to put all of her immense strength into each throw, especially that last one. Sweat was rolling down her pale face. Did I just kill a great nightmare creature? Her tired voice was faint and full of disbelief. Cassie smiled gently. You certainly did. Effie took a deep breath and put her trembling hand on her belly, as if trying to protect it. Damn, I've been spending too much time with Doofus, huh? Of course, the great beast had already been brought to the verge of death by undying slaughter. And of course, all members of the cohort had done their part in order to make the outcome possible. And yet, a great beast had fallen by Effie's hand. It was a startling achievement, to say the least. A feat worthy of raised by wolves, the legendary huntress of the Dark City. Effie smiled weakly, lingered for a few moments, and said in a solemn tone, Well, The island quaked, and the sound of breaking stones swallowed her words. Far below, more stone debris slid into the widening chasm. Even the bridge shuddered slightly, a net of cracks appearing on its surface. On the far side of the bridge, undying slaughter stared at the dead great beast for a few moments, then turned and looked across the chasm at the members of the cohort. Sunny shivered, feeling an eerie chill. Let's go. They stepped on the bridge at the same moment as the mist wraith did. There was nothing left for them to do but fight. Come aid me. His shadows rose from the ground, flowing onto his body. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth one, however, wrapped itself around Nephi's instead. At the same time, a generous measure of her pure flame filled him with radiant warmth. The sum of their powers was greater than the parts. Sonny felt as strong as a titan. He dashed forward, followed by Nephi's and Saint. The three of them were going to confront the mist wraith first, and hopefully force her to assume a less ghostly form. Jet, Fiend, and Nightmare would attack second. Remember, our weapon is time. The blade of the cruel sight ignited with divine flame. They clashed with the dreadful wraith in the middle of the cracking bridge. Undying Slaughter was still stronger, faster, and far more malevolent than Nephi's and Sonny, however. With Saint fighting by their side, the two of them were able to keep up. Far more important was the fact that both Sonny and Nephi's were combat prodigies. He could follow Undying Slaughter's movements, and even predict them, because of his mastery of shadow dance. She was capable of doing the same because controlling the flow of combat and manipulating the actions of her enemies had always been the basis of her skill. Now that Neph's combat mastery entered a period of rapid growth, that ability of hers had become even more frightening. Therefore, both of them could counterbalance Undying Slaughter's undeniable superiority, to a degree. Still, Sonny felt stifled in this battle. That was because he was not just fighting against the terrifying mist wraith. He was also fighting against the memories of dying terribly by her hand. The pain of having his soul shattered, the dread of seeing his shadow killed, the sorrow of being helpless to save his companions. All those scars were like chains that weighed his limbs down. If Sonny wanted to have a chance of surviving this fight, he had to break these chains. I'm alive, am I not? He received the ghostly blade on the shaft of the cruel sight and was thrown back, his hands growing numb. Before Undying Slaughter could advance and deliver a follow-up attack, though Nephi's appeared in her way, her sword shining with incandescent radiance, the single gem of the crown of dawn burning like a third eye. Sonny regained his balance and threw himself back into the fight. I survived. Neph staggered back, but Saint took her place. The graceful knight was wielding her dark sword in both hands, facing the mist wraith with cold indifference. They clashed fiercely, and the stone bridge shuddered. He was already lunging forward to share the pressure with his shadow. And now it's time to deliver some payback. After all, Sonny was nothing if not vindictive. He had destroyed the Black Knight of the ruined cathedral for gutting him. He killed the immortal Transcendent, Solving, for throwing him into the Red Colosseum. He had shattered the fallen Titan Goliath for bringing him to the very doorstep of death. Now, what was he going to do to Undying Slaughter for killing him multiple times? Weighed down by an instinctual fear, Sonny used an old ally to overcome its spite. With its help, some of the invisible chains that were holding him back snapped. But not all of them. Working together with Nephi's and Saint, Sonny managed to stall Undying Slaughter. The three of them surrounded her, but they were in no position to attack. Instead, they were barely managing to stay alive while protecting each other and concentrating on defense. The mist wraith was slowly pushing them back. Sonny's spiteful nature was enough to help him overcome the memory of agony and death, but it was not powerful enough to dispel a deeper, far more painful fear. The fear of watching those he cared about die. The memory of that helplessness, that sorrow, that guilt was incomparably more dreadful than the memory of having his own life snuffed out. Death was merciful, after all. The dead felt no pain. So, to struggle free of the remaining chains, Sonny needed to find a more resilient source of strength within his heart. He could not rid himself of the lingering scars delivered to him by Alethia's island with just spite. As he searched for that source, Undying Slaughter moved like mist, suddenly appearing behind Nephi's. Her ghostly blade lashed out silently, almost piercing Neph's chest. If the young woman had not dodged at the last moment, one of her soul cores would have been destroyed. Sunny froze for a moment, and then exploded with ferocious might. "Ah, I think I found it." Finally, the fear that had been holding him back was vanquished. Sunny had found the strength he needed to free himself of it, and it was an obvious one at that. His desire to protect those he cherished was much more powerful than his vindictive desire to avenge himself. It made sense, really, since the fear of losing his companions was stronger than the fear of losing his own life. The resolve that had to do with others would naturally be larger than the resolve that only had to do with himself. Payback was fine, but protecting the people he loved was a much more powerful source of motivation. Incomparably so, really. Feeling as if a great weight had been removed from his heart, Sunny shook off the lingering trauma of having endured the loop and threw himself into the battle with boundless determination. His killing intent soared, not at all inferior to the murderous will of the dreadful wraith. And yet, Sunny did not allow that intent to rule him. Coldly and callously, he reminded himself of what their goal was. It was not to defeat undying slaughter in battle. It was to prolong the battle to the point where her flaw would destroy her without their help, or at least weaken her enough to doom her. Now that Sunny's mental state was cleansed, he entered the familiar state of combat clarity. His movements turned sharper and more precise. His wildly beating heart calmed down. "We can do it." Killing the Mist Wraith was, perhaps, out of their reach, but resisting her for a while, that Sunny and his companions could accomplish. As Alethia's island shuddered and quaked, they continued to fight undying slaughter on a crumbling bridge. Sunny, Nephi's, and Saint held out for as long as they could. Eventually, though, even their inexhaustible bodies had grown heavy with fatigue. This was one of the most intense fights Sunny had ever participated in. The perilous battle with Dire Fang seemed mild in comparison to this harrowing clash. Of course, they couldn't keep up with this level of intensity for a long time. They had done their part, though. The essence that undying slaughter had absorbed by killing devouring beast was already somewhat exhausted in her battle against the nightmare creatures. The three of them had forced the Mist Wraith to waste even more, draining her reserves. She had already abandoned her ghostly form, facing them as a creature of flesh and bone. Still, if things continued in that manner, the defiled saint would inevitably kill them. However, undying slaughter possessed one fatal weakness. She was alone, and no one survived in the dream realm alone. Just as Sunny was feeling that they were about to die, he shouted hoarsely and withdrew. Nephi's and Saint dashed away at the same time. Jet and Fiend took their place, followed by Nightmare, who rose from the shadows. The retreat and advance were performed seamlessly, not giving the Wraith a chance to give chase. A moment later, Jet's frosty glaive collided with undying slaughter's ghostly blade. Soul Reaper grinned. "My back is still itching from the last time we met. Prepare to die again, you filth." Sunny staggered back and leaned on the cruel sight, breathing heavily. He did not know how long this respite would last, or even if the island itself would last much longer. All he knew was that he had to be able to rejoin the battle as soon as possible. By his side, Nephi sheathed her sword, looking at the battle happening in front of them with somber intensity. White flames were dancing in her eyes. Jet, Fiend, and Nightmare were holding their own against undying slaughter, mostly because she was already running extremely low on essence and did not summon her unholy powers much. Her speed and strength also decreased, but not by a lot. Sunny gritted his teeth when Fiend was sent flying back by a devastating blow from the ghostly blade. His impenetrable steel carapace held this time, but the infernal ogre looked rattled and pained by the defiled saint's strike. Nightmare was the most vulnerable of the three, but he was by no means weak. His furious attacks gave Jet the opportunity to advance. Soul Reaper was the tip of their attack formation. Jet fought with cold fury, her glaive leaving afterimages in its wake. She met undying slaughter blow for blow, refusing to be pushed back. It was as if she had forgotten what hesitation was. In fact, she seemed to be enjoying herself. Her lips were twisted into a dark, murderous grin. Her icy blue eyes were like two lakes of frozen wrath. The two of them were so alike that, sometimes, it was hard to tell which one was the valiant master and which one was the defiled wraith. "Wretch, you are such a disappointment." Jet growled those words and then staggered back. At the same time, Saint struck her sword against her breastplate twice and lunged forward. Sunny followed. "Go!" They had replaced Jet, Fiend, and Nightmare again. This time, there was a slight delay before the tired fighters retreated and the relatively rested fighters advanced. However, a bone javelin fell from the sky, forcing the defiled saint to slow down for a moment. Alethia's island was convulsing all around them. Large chunks of stone fell from the bottom of the bridge and plummeted into the chasm of the empty moat. "Die!" Sunny crossed blades with undying slaughter once again. They fought, they endured, they bought time. Time was their greatest weapon, after all. After a while, Sunny felt like he was going to drop dead. They had already advanced and retreated 3 times, but the mist wraith was still as overbearing and deadly as ever. Or maybe not quite. Her strength was decreasing too. Her essence had to be running dry. Undying slaughter still maintained an emotionless expression, her chilling blue eyes filling him with a sense of dread, but her behavior had subtly changed. It was almost as if she was feeling, if not desperate, then at least pressed. "We just need to last a little longer." At that moment, the surface of the stone bridge under his feet rippled and tilted. Startled, Sunny lost his balance only for a split second, but it was enough. The ghostly blade was already flying at him, inevitable as death itself. Before it could ravage his soul, however, an incandescent sword appeared in its path. Nephis had struck from an awkward angle and groaned when her sword clashed with Undying Slaughter's blade. It was violently thrown aside and slipped from her hands, disappearing into the darkness below the bridge. She was pushed back as well and fell down. Saint was a step or two too far to help. Sunny's eyes widened. But strangely enough, the mist wraith did not finish either him or Nephis off. In fact, she seemed to have staggered as well. This was the first time Undying Slaughter had shown a sign of weakness. It was also the last. Before the mist wraith could regain her balance, a swift figure flew between Nephis and Sunny. He felt a cool wind throw his hair into disarray. Then he heard the air whining as it was cut by a sharp blade. A split second later, Jet's glaive tore through the distance between her and the staggered wraith, plunging into Undying Slaughter's chest. The two of them froze for a second, 2 pairs of icy blue eyes staring into each other with indescribable emotion. The defiled saint raised her blade, as if trying to retaliate, but Jet simply twisted her glaive and gripped it tighter. "You go to hell." Her voice was as cold as a nameless grave. Jet batted the ghostly blade away, pulled her hand back, and then thrust her weapon into the enemy's soul once again. Sunny thought that he heard the crystal ring of something breaking. And then the chilling light of the defiled saint's eyes grew dim. The wraith swayed slightly and fell back. The moment her body touched the stone, it turned into mist and dissipated, disappearing without a trace. Undying Slaughter was no more. "She's dead." For a moment there was silence. Sunny regained his balance, grunted, and hurried to help Nephis stand up. Saint lowered her sword, acting as indifferent as ever. It was as if they had not just narrowly escaped being slaughtered by a defiled saint. But they had. The defiled saint was truly, undeniably gone, slaughtered just like she had slaughtered countless living beings. Hell. Behind them, Fiend and Nightmare were both battered, but relatively unscathed. Both shadows were watching Jet with piercing intensity. Soul Reaper herself stood motionlessly above the spot where her future self had perished. Her icy blue eyes were strangely distant. Finally, she let out a long sigh. So that's how it is. Suddenly, her figure was shrouded in cold mist. That mist flowed along the graceful lines of her supple body, finally forming into a ghostly blade. Then, the shape of that blade changed, elongating until it turned into a beautiful glaive, no, rather, a war scythe. Its dark steel possessed a dreadful sheen to it, with frost patterns decorating the sinister curved blade. The ghostly scythe seemed to absorb all warmth from the world, emanating a frigid sense of lethal cold. An amused smile appeared on Jet's face. Raising an eyebrow, she turned to Sunny and said, "You won't believe what the spell just said. I guess all I had to do was kill myself to receive my aspect legacy." An aspect legacy? Sunny was momentarily stunned. Jet was a strange existence, a person who was not quite alive, but also not quite dead. So, there was a strange and darkly poetic logic to her aspect legacy being locked behind the act of attaining the purest expression of one of these states, namely, dying once again. However, how had killing undying slaughter substituted true death? And what kind of an insane requisite it was to literally die? All aspect legacies had unique conditions of being unlocked, but still, wasn't the spell going too far with this one? Sunny opened his mouth to say something, but he never got the chance. Just at that moment, the island shuddered once again, and the damaged bridge they were standing on finally collapsed. Surrounded by stone debris, the members of the cohort plummeted into the dark chasm. Crap! The fall from such height was not going to kill an ascended, but hitting the ground would not be pleasant, either, especially if a few pieces of the bridge decided to fall on their heads immediately after. He dismissed Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare before calling upon the shadows and manifesting them into resilient chains. Grabbing onto them, the three masters managed to control their fall and land at the bottom of the empty moat safely. There, everything was a mess. Effie had shattered a large portion of the cliff slope earlier, causing countless tons of black rock to slide into the moat. The great beast she killed later had also caused a collapse, sending an avalanche of stones and soil into the chasm. Neff's incandescent sword was laying on the ground just a few meters away from them, its radiance illuminating the chaotic scene. She walked over and picked it up, then looked around somberly. "Is everyone all right?" Jet was the first one to answer. Dismissing the ghostly scythe, she seemed to absorb the torrent of frosty mist it had turned into and nodded. "I'm fine," Sunny answered a few moments later. "Yes, no." The first word was said in a relaxed tone, while the second was a bit shaky. Standing at the bottom of the moat, he had glanced down and noticed a wide crack running through the rock surface beneath him. His right foot was on one side of the crack, while his left was on the other. The fracture seemed to be rather deep, extremely deep. Staring into the darkness, Sunny realized that the fracture was not just deep. It was, in fact, bottomless. That was because it was not just the bottom of the moat that had cracked, but the bottom of the island as well. So, what he was looking at was actually the unfathomable darkness at the heart of the colossal vortex. The fracture pierced Alethia's island straight through, leading to the abyss beneath it. Raising his head, Sunny stared at Nephi's and Jet for a moment, then said in a bleak tone, I think that this whole island is about to fall apart." He carefully moved his right leg over the crack and let out a small sigh of relief when it safely landed near his left one. "So, how about we get the hell off before it does?" He didn't have to ask twice. However, climbing out of the moat had turned out harder than they anticipated. Just as they approached the wall of the chasm, Alethia's island quaked once again, the deafening sound of cracking stone echoing in the empty moat. The fracture Sunny had noticed grew wider, chunks of black rock falling into the darkness below. At the same time, a rain of stones fell on them from above. Nephi's frowned, obliterating an especially heavy boulder with one strike of her incandescent sword. Jet nimbly evaded a few more. Cursed! The shadow chains shot forward, protecting Sonny and his companions. Looking back, he saw the familiar golden rope appearing in Neph's hands. She threw it to him without having to say anything. Sonny caught the rope and immediately dove into the shadows, stepping out of them on the crumbled remains of the bridge. By the time he pulled Nephi's and Jet up, Cassie and Effie had already descended from the stone steps. The island was shaking and convulsing around them, with almost no pause between the tremors anymore. Sonny's expression was dim. "Let's go. It's time we escape this damned place." They crossed the moat and entered the former killing field around Tower. Now, it was simply the death field. Carcasses of dreadful nightmare creatures littered the ground, which was soaked with their blood. The long-boned javelins Sonny had crafted and Effie had thrown protruded from their flesh, each one as heavy as a bolt meant for an impossible siege engine. Sonny would have loved to collect the soul shards from the dead abominations, but there was no time. Passing between the corpses, the cohort entered the shattered remains of the ancient pine forest. All around them, Alethia's island was coming undone. Without the deadly nightmare creatures hiding in the mist and blocking the way, it took them a surprisingly short amount of time to reach the hidden bay. Sonny struggled to believe how much blood he had spilled in the past to traverse the dreadful reaches of Alethia's island. Now that its prisoners were gone, the island had fallen silent. Of course, it was hard to recognize the places where Sonny had fought, struggled, and died. The forest was no more, with most of the ancient pines laying on the ground, either toppled or entirely destroyed. The mist was largely gone, too, revealing the scene of startling destruction in all its frightening glory. Massive carcasses towered above the devastated landscape here and there, some of them partially devoured. Rivers of blood flowed between the toppled trees, turning the remains of the forest into a vile swamp. It was like a scene out of a feverish nightmare. Well, of course it was. They were in a nightmare after all. As the cohort hurried to reach the chain breaker, Alethia's island was starting to fall apart. It was shuddering and quaking, making it hard to advance at a steady pace. More cracks appeared in the blood-soaked soil, some of them leading all the way down to the darkness below. Sometimes, a wide chasm would open right in front of the cohort, forcing them to change course and rush to circle around it. It felt like they were running out of time. But in the end, they did not. Sonny was starting to feel rather restless, but just then, the cohort finally reached the stone steps leading down to the white beach. Cassie was riding Nightmare, while Effie was once again being carried by the covetous Coffer. Sending the two of them ahead, he joined Nephi's and Jet in descending from the cliffs in a much faster way. They simply jumped off the edge and used their memories to glide down. Finally, they saw the chain breaker in the distance. The graceful vessel was where they had left it, crashed against a black cliff, its bow buried in the white sand. Hurry! As they raced across the white beach, the whole island seemed to have tilted. A thunderous sound of something impossibly large breaking rolled from behind them, and Sonny felt his heart skipping a beat. They reached the chain breaker and wasted no time climbing aboard. The dawn had come and gone before the battle with undying slaughter, and dusk was still too far away. The timing of their escape was not at all optimal, but they had little choice but to make do. The task of raising the ship into the air once again fell to Nephi's. While Effie and Jet were looking around with stunned expressions, neither of them had seen the chain breaker during the last cycle of the time loop. After all, Nephi's dashed to the enchantment circle at the stern of the ship. Cassie had disappeared to somewhere under the deck, while Sonny simply stood where he was, looking back at Alethia's island. That cursed place. The fact that he was finally going to escape this harrowing hell did not feel real. After all the pain, all the suffering, all the deaths, with how elusive time had been inside the loop. The months Sonny spent repeating the same desperate actions over and over again felt like an eternity. Who says you can escape? The sin of solace had appeared from somewhere, unnoticed, and was now standing behind him. Who says that your suffering is over, that your pain is over? Fool, you don't even know how pitiful you are. Sonny smiled darkly. Be quiet, at least I'm not as pitiful as you. Just at the moment, the island quaked once again. In the distance, the black cliffs rising above the beach crumbled and collapsed, falling down like a black avalanche. A giant crack appeared on the ground, the sand spilling into it like water, and crawled in the direction of the chain breaker. Then the flying ship moved as well. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, it rose above the ground and soared into the sky. Nephi's was guiding it away from the disintegrating beach. Sonny watched Alethia's island break apart in silence. He had lost so much here, but he had gained so much as well. Jet and Effie were now safely back with the cohort. That had been the reason why Sonny, Nephi's, and Cassie had come to the mysterious place known as Windflower. In the first place, they had achieved their goal. Unexpectedly, what they had gained, the forces of the defilement had lost. 2 members had rejoined the cohort, while 2 of the 6 plagues had perished. That was a truly surprising but indescribably beneficial outcome. Sonny could hardly believe their luck. Of course, it wasn't just luck. It was a combination of good fortune, their unrelenting efforts, and to a large extent of the nefarious schemes of the Mad Prince. That was another thing Sonny had gained, knowledge. Knowledge about the Mad Prince, yes, but also about so many other things. Some of the greatest mysteries of existence had been revealed to him on Alethia's island. The nature of the dream realm, the past atrocities of the nightmare spell, even the origin of his own world. Perhaps even more importantly, Sonny had also learned a few things about himself. How he felt, what he wanted, and what he feared as well. Oh, and he had also become a terror. His soul possessed 6 cores now, and he possessed 6 shadows. His power had once again grown, and there was now only one step separating him from its pinnacle. Sonny had died countless times on Alethia's island. He had battled and slain many harrowing nightmare creatures, hunting his skill and earning priceless battle experience. Some of them were far too deadly for a master to face, and yet in the end all of them had perished while he survived. The entire island shuddered one last time and broke apart, falling into the abyssal darkness below. All the horrors, secrets, and treasures left behind by Alethia of the 9 disappeared with it. Standing on the deck of the chain breaker, Sonny let out a quiet sigh. All in a day's work. It was not a bad result. The flying ship hovered in the air for a few moments, and then slowly started climbing down. It was heading for the same lightless abyss that had swallowed the island, diving into the darkness that lay at the heart of the great river. Soon, the darkness welcomed them into its silent embrace. End of Part 2, Keeper of Truths. The chain breaker was assaulted by hurricane winds as it plummeted into the heart of the colossal whirlpool. Nephi's had yet to run out of essence, so their fall was controlled for now. However, that would change soon. Sonny was still overwhelmed by the destruction of Alethia's island. Shaking off his reverie, he took a deep breath and forced himself to move. All across the flying vessel, deep shadows stirred and surged forward, turning into inky black hands. The manifested shadows pulled on the ropes, unfurling the horizontal sails. Those sails extended from both sides of the ship and were meant to help it glide on the winds. At the same time, he nervously looked down. All Sonny could see was darkness. It was not the true darkness that his sight had never been able to penetrate. Instead, the abyssal chasm was simply too deep for him to see anything. Great! By now, the slopes of the vortex had almost turned vertical. It was as if the chain breaker was surrounded by a vast wall of dark water, its current so fast that its surface was like a blur. At first, the dreadful maw of the whirlpool was dozens of kilometers wide, but the further they descended, the narrower it became. Eventually, it was as if the chain breaker had entered a twisting vertical tunnel that was just a few kilometers in diameter. They were surrounded by absolute darkness, with only a scattering of lanterns illuminating the deck. It was like a small island of light in an ocean of nothingness. No one except for Sonny could see the spinning walls of the tunnel, which was, perhaps, for the best. He knew that if the ship touched the water, it would be torn apart by the tremendous pressure of the current. What the hell am I thinking? It's not for the best, not at all. The chain breaker was falling vertically, for now, but it was only possible because Neff was still empowering its enchantments with her essence. Once her essence ran dry, they would have to move in a wide spiral along the watery walls of the tunnel to keep the ship balanced. Otherwise, it would be too easy for it to roll and overturn. By then, not seeing where the darkness ended and the furious current began would be lethal. Even worse, the tunnel was not strictly vertical. Looking down, Sonny could see it twisting and turning like a descending tornado. He gritted his teeth. Damnation! Could they even survive in this abyss without the chain breaker's enchantments? He turned to look at the stern of the ship, where Nephi's was struggling with the steering oars. But at that moment, Cassie's voice reached his ears. "Sonny here." The blind girl was standing near the entrance to the main cargo hold, waving at him. Her voice sounded urgent. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then rushed to her side. "What is it?" She pulled him into the cargo hold, a grim expression on her face. "I need your help, or rather your shadow's help. Summon her and make her as strong as possible, please." Somewhat confused, Sonny lingered for a second, then called upon Saint and sent all 6 of his shadows to augment her. As soon as the taciturn knight appeared, her onyx armor shone with dark radiance, and a feeling of oppressive might emanated from her graceful figure. Down in the cargo hold, various objects were neatly laid out on the wooden floor. There were amphorae containing strange liquids, brushes, stone etchings of complicated runes, mortars, and items that Sonny did not even know how to describe. Most glaringly of all, the black stone from the hidden chamber of Alethia's tower was also there, illuminated by the faint radiance of the guiding light. He gave Cassie a long look. "What's this?" The blind girl was already walking toward the black stone. "We spent a lot of time inside the loop. Most of it was occupied by trying to escape, but I had plenty of time to think as well, about how to repair the enchantment circuit of the chain breaker in particular." She stopped and pointed at the chunk of black rock. "I need you to help me shatter it. I tried to do it myself, but I'm not strong enough." Sonny felt a bit weird for a moment. It was as if she was asking him to open a jar of pickles for her, whatever that was. In any case, the jagged piece of black rock was not a jar of any sort. Instead, it was a mystical stone that was rumored to be a fragment of the estuary. Of course, Cassie was not strong enough to break it. However, she was trying to finish repairing the runic circuit of the flying vessel, connecting its enchantments to the sacred tree. If Cassie succeeded in time, perhaps, they would not be torn apart by the current of the spinning tunnel. Sonny wasn't sure if he was strong enough to crush the black stone, either. But Saint was a transcendent devil, and augmented by 6 shadows on top of that. Glancing at the indifferent onyx knight, he gestured at the black stone. Her ruby eyes shone darkly, and, summoning her tenebrous blade, Saint took a step forward. The black sword fell on the jagged piece of rock and bounced away, not leaving even a single scratch on it. She lingered for a moment. Then a flood of darkness flowed from beneath Saint's armor, entering the black blade. The blade itself rippled and changed form, turning into a long, elegant lucerne. The dark lucerne might have been elegant, but both its beak and hammerhead were capable of delivering truly devastating blows. A weapon such as this was far better suited for piercing armor and breaking bones than a sword was. So, it had a far better chance of shattering the mystical stone. Saint took a step back, then slowly raised her weapon above her head, and struck down with enough force to make Sunny stagger. There was a flash, a shockwave, and a thunderous boom. When he regained his vision once again, Saint had already lowered the lucerne. Her ruby eyes were cold and indifferent. The black stone lay broken into several pieces. Cassie pointed to them and said hurriedly, "Again." Soon the large pieces had turned into smaller ones, and then were finally ground into fine dust inside one of the mortars. The stone dust was then mixed with the strange liquid stored inside the ceramic vessels, some of which turned out to be blood, hopefully that of nightmare creatures. By the time they emerged from the cargo hold, Nephi's was running out of essence, and the chain breaker was growing more and more unstable. Cassie hesitated for a moment, then pointed to the stern. "Go help Neph." Sunny nodded and used Shadow Step to appear by Neph's side. Using his ability to see in the dark, he helped her guide the flying vessel into a spiraling descent. Nephi steered the ship, while Sunny played the role of a navigator. Cassie, meanwhile, crawled along the grooves carved into the deck of the chain breaker, feverishly drawing runes on the ancient wood. Essence poured out of her, making the runes glimmer slightly before being absorbed into the deck. The sorcerous ink created from the dust of the black stone disappeared without leaving a trace. Jet and Effie were helping her by carrying the amphory containing ink and handing her brushes. Each one only lasted a dozen seconds or so, gradually dissolving into thin air. The flight of the chain breaker turned more and more unstable. Eventually, Nephi's gritted her teeth and slumped slightly, the runic circle surrounding her growing dim. The flying ship shuddered. With no more sorcery supporting it, it glided through the darkness, carried only by inertia and the wind pressure, which created a lifting force under the horizontal sails. Neph continued to hold the oars, trying her best to keep the chain breaker from plummeting into an uncontrollable fall. Standing by her side, Sunny uttered a silent curse. Which idiot thought that this was a good idea? Oh, it was him, he had thought so. The ancient vessel descended into the darkness, its speed increasing at a frightening rate. The angle of their descent was increasing, as well, slowly approaching the point where it would turn into a fatal nosedive. Some distance away, near the sacred tree, Cassie threw the remains of another dissolved brush away and raised a hand to receive a new one. Patches of skin on her delicate hands had begun dissolving as well, and fresh blood mixed with the sorcerous ink. Are we going to have to abandon the ship? Sunny had the dark wing and the heavenly burden in his soul arsenal. He could also temporarily turn into a crow. The other members of the cohort had their own memories to help them, if not fly, then at least glide. Theoretically, they could continue the descent using those. But somehow, he did not think that they would survive the depths of the great river without the impregnable hull of the chain breaker. The ancient vessel shuddered once again. And then the darkness was suddenly dispelled by a soft radiance. Raising his head, Sunny watched the sacred tree in stunned silence. Its leaves were shining with a pure, beautiful light. At the same time, the runic circle surrounding Nephi's ignited once more, and their flight turned as smooth as it had been before, much smoother even. Bathed in the radiance of the sacred tree, Cassie let out a tired sigh and slumped on the deck. Finally, the enchantment circuit of the chain breaker had been fully restored. Illuminated by the gentle light of the sacred tree, the chain breaker was flying through the darkness. It moved in a wide spiral, descending lower and lower into the abyssal darkness with each spin. Around it, the moving walls of the dark tunnel were twisting and turning as the water comprising them revolved at a dreadful speed. Now that Cassie had repaired the enchantment circuit of the ancient vessel, the immediate crisis was resolved. The members of the cohort finally received a chance to catch their breaths. The events of the past day had simply been too overwhelming. The destruction of the island had followed immediately after the battle with undying slaughter, and so everyone was exhausted. They simply dropped to the deck, praying that nothing terrible happened in the next few hours, minutes, even at least. Sunny temporarily took the steering oars, allowing Nephi's to heal Cassie's mangled hands. After that, everyone remained near the runic circle, looking into the darkness. "Where do you think the vortex leads?" Effie's voice sounded a bit stifled. He lingered for a moment, then sighed. "I don't really know. All I know is that someone passed through it and survived in the past. Granted, that person was of the supreme rank." Sunny paused for a moment and added, his voice somber, "It might be the inner wall of the pyramid. In any case, we shall see." After that, he glanced at Cassie. Now that they had been granted a moment to compose themselves, his curiosity was tingling. "By the way, why did you need that piece of rock to repair the ship?" The others seemed curious too. The blind girl hesitated for a bit, then explained. "I guess, imagine a locked door. There are a few ways to get on the other side of the door. The simplest is to use a key, provided you have one. In this case, the key would have been the detailed knowledge of the original enchantment of the chain breaker. I do know a few things about it, but not enough." She pointed to the runic circle, which glimmered faintly in the darkness. "The second way is to be a locksmith who understands the structure of the door's lock, or any lock really, on a deep level. That way, you can pick it without a key. Sadly, my knowledge of sorcery is not that deep, which left only the third way, brute force." Cassie briefly touched her hands. Under the influence of Neff's flame, her soft skin had regrown. There was no blood, bared flesh, and pale bone in sight. The ghastly wounds were gone. "I don't know if that piece of rock really came from the estuary, but it is definitely the same as the stone walls of the pyramid, which means that it was a part of an unholy titan once. You have experience crafting extraordinary weapons yourself, so you know how much the material matters. Therefore, I simply borrowed the power of the material to make up for my lack of knowledge." Sunny stared at her incredulously for a few moments, then let out a sigh. "I don't think there was anything simple about what you did, but okay." Her explanation did make some sense. Sunny was not too knowledgeable about runic sorcery, not to mention the enchantments of the chain breaker. However, he was a modestly accomplished sorcerer himself. As such, he knew that a valuable material could indeed substitute skill, sometimes. For example, he would have to be a god of weaving to create an enchantment that could allow mundane steel to pierce the hide of a great beast, if such a thing was even possible. But if that mundane steel was replaced by the bones of a great tyrant, there was no need to even add an enchantment. Weapons crafted from such bones would possess a mystical power of their own, and that power would be enough to kill the great beast, at least in the hands of someone as strong as Effie, and while the abomination's own mystical power was diminished by grievous wounds to its soul. I should remember this lesson well. Sunny had no doubt that he would create many memories in the future. Before, he was mostly only worried about acquiring enough powerful soul shards and learning the patterns of varied weaves. Perhaps it was time to start concerning himself with searching for extraordinary materials as well. He smiled faintly. In any case, good job repairing the chain breaker. It was just in time. There were a few moments of silence, and then Effie suddenly cleared her throat. "Yeah, great job, Cassie. But can someone please explain to me how the hell is chain breaker here? What is it doing in our nightmare?" Sunny blinked a couple of times. Right, there was this mystery as well. He and Nephi's glanced at each other. A moment later, he said hesitantly, "Honestly, we have no idea. You should already know about how weird time functions inside the tomb of Ariel, so our current theory is that one of the previous owners of this ship visited the pyramid at some point. It was just drifting aimlessly far upstream. There was no one aboard and no signs of who that previous owner had been, so Neff and I took it. Effie looked at them with a strange expression, then grinned and patted the deck with her hand. Well, it's good that you did. I can't even describe how much I missed my cozy cabin while roaming the great river on the back of a weird mutant shark. Look, the floor is solid. I might honestly cry. Still smiling, she turned to Jet and asked, "So what? You really got your aspect legacy?" Jet glanced at her and shrugged. "Yes, and before you ask, no, you can't eat it. Too bad you didn't receive anything cool yourself, huh?" Effie's smile widened. "Who says I didn't?" With that, she stretched her long legs, assumed a more comfortable pose, and let out a small laugh. "I did, if you consider a supreme memory cool, that is." The aspect legacy Jet had received was similar to most aspect legacies, which were usually memories uniquely suited for the aspects of their wielders, or much more rarely powerful echoes. However, that similarity was deceitful. In truth, Soul Reaper's aspect legacy was almost as weird as Sunny's. Although it looked like a weapon, it was not a memory. Instead, it was an innate ability. Jet did not need essence, no matter how little, to summon the chilling mist and turn it into a scythe. The mist was simply a part of her soul now. Its form was also not set in stone. The mist blade naturally manifested into a beautiful war scythe, but it could assume the shape of other weapons. As well as they watched, Jet turned it into a khopesh, a misericord, a bec de corbin, and an actual scythe. There seemed to be only 5 available forms, at least for now. All 5 shapes were that of a weapon, and that weapon was soulbound, but not in the way that Sunny's marble shell was soulbound. In the case of the marble shell, its power was directly tied to the power of his soul. Jet's scythe, however, was bound to the souls of those it killed. Or rather, those souls would become bound to it. None of them knew what it meant, precisely. However, Soul Reaper was able to conclude a couple of things from reading the description of this strange innate ability. First of all, the mist blade was able to absorb and contain the souls of its victims. The soul of the most powerful being killed by it would become the basis of its power. So, if Jet slayed a great beast, her scythe would become akin to a supreme memory of the first tier. If she killed an unholy titan, the scythe would become akin to a divine memory of the 7th tier, which was a bizarre and truly astonishing quality. Secondly, the souls contained within the mist could be consumed, replenishing Jet's essence. If all souls were consumed, leaving the mist blade empty, her own soul would become the basis of its power. These were the things she knew. However, there were still many questions about her aspect legacy. For example, how many souls could it contain? Would they only influence the mist blade's power, or would they also infuse it with unique qualities akin to enchantments? If so, if Jet consumed all the bound souls, what unique quality would her own soul infuse? Although there were no answers, Sunny felt like the souls of the victims would indeed infuse the mist blade with unique enchantments. He also suspected that the number of souls the mist could contain was 5, one for each of the forms it could take, equal to the supreme rank of Jet's aspect. He also suspected that if she consumed all 5 of the bound souls, the aspect legacy would become much more potent and dire. The reason was rather simple. The only situation where Jet would burn both through her own essence and the souls stored inside the mist blade was a truly desperate situation, and those usually called for the most desperate solutions. He wouldn't be surprised to learn that if the mist blade was devoid of bound souls, it could allow Soul Reaper to consume her own soul in order to accomplish something truly dire. How sinister! The beautiful war scythe was a dreadful thing indeed. Effie's supreme memory, meanwhile, was much less terrifying, which was not to say that it wasn't wondrous. When the huntress first summoned the memory, no one knew what to make of it. It was not a weapon, nor was it an armor. In fact, it did not resemble a tool or a garment. Either, at best, it could pass for a charm. The memory looked like a large iron locket tied to a black leather cord. Inside the locket was an image of a meadow surrounded by tall hills, with a river running through it and a forest visible in the distance. A black dog was resting in the shade of a tall tree. The drawing was simple and crude, as if made by a child. After looking at the weave of the supreme memory, Sonny was momentarily dazed. It was one of the most strange and intricate weaves he had ever seen. There was something familiar about it, though. After pondering for a few moments, Sonny understood why he felt this sense of familiarity. It was because he had been studying the covetous coffer recently, and some parts of this startling new weave bore a distant resemblance to a few elements of what he had been staring at for the better part of the past week. Effie confirmed his guess. The iron locket was a spatial storage memory. However, it was entirely different from the coffer. That was because, unlike his toothy chest, the locket could store living beings. Sonny was really surprised to hear that. But the vigorous huntress simply grinned and promptly demonstrated what she meant. Before he knew it, the abyssal darkness of the vortex and the softly illuminated deck of the chain breaker disappeared. Instead, he was blinded by bright sunlight. When Sonny was able to see again, he found himself standing on a green meadow. There were tall hills in the distance, a forest to his right and a river to his left. The only thing missing was a black dog. For a few moments, he felt confused at the fact that there was only one sun in the sky. Where did the other 6 go? Then Sonny realized where he was and almost jumped in surprise. He was just about to send his shadows to explore when Effie retrieved him from the dog locket. Suddenly, he was back on the deck of the chain breaker. The huntress looked really curious. "Oh, I see that you are alive. Good, did it work?" Sonny stared at her in outrage. "Why, what? You weren't certain it would." Effie coughed. "This is the first time I summoned the locket, so how would I know? Well, I was mostly certain. Yeah, definitely." He shook his head in exasperation and took a deep breath. And yes, it worked. Sonny described what he had experienced. After a bit of exploration, they discovered that the space contained within the locket was not too big. It was about 3 kilometers across, encompassing the meadow, several hills, a part of the forest, and the river. Beyond the boundary, the world turned into a crude painting, and it was impossible to move further. Nevertheless, living beings could indeed be stored in that space. There was even water for them to drink and berries for them to gather in the forest. Needless to say, such a space could be extremely useful. Sonny had never seen such a bizarre memory. Wow, supreme memories are really on another level. The crown of twilight was already mind-boggling enough, but Effie's locket took the prize. Although it was not nearly as powerful as Daron's crown, just in terms of uniqueness, it was far ahead. What a great prize! After taking a short rest, the cohort concentrated on traveling deeper into the abyssal tunnel. Surrounded by darkness, the chain breaker continued to travel down the twisting underwater tunnel. Cassie had taken up the steering oars, which alleviated some of Sonny's nervousness. While she was the most experienced helmsman among them, he barely knew what he was doing. So the chances of the flying ship colliding with the walls of the tunnel and being torn apart by the water current were reduced by a lot with the blind seer at the helm. Still, no one knew what waited for them in the depths of the great river. They were nervous, apprehensive, and full of grim anticipation. The cohort rested, consumed a hearty meal, and went about repairing the slight damage dealt to the flying ship by its crash landing on Alethia's island. The enchanted hull weathered the rough landing well, only receiving a few shallow scrapes. However, there were more delicate parts of the ship that had to be mended or replaced. Sunny, Nephi's Jet, and Effie were not carpenters or builders, but their skill was enough for the task. After all, Sunny was a specialist in wilderness survival, while Nephi's had been able to build boats all the way back on the forgotten shore. Effie had the experience of surviving in the dark city for years, while Jet was Jet. She was somehow capable of doing anything that needed to be done. Later, they gathered on the deck and silently observed the darkness below. After a while, Sunny grew bored and summoned the covetous coffer. Borrowing Effie's locket, he began comparing the two weaves with each other. He was very curious to see if he could make the storage inside the coffer habitable as well. For now, it seemed incredibly far-fetched. But then again, many of the things he had accomplished seemed far-fetched once. If he was not capable of doing something today, he might be able to do it in the future. Becoming a competent sorcerer was a gradual process. Time slowly passed, and as it did, the depths of the great river slowly changed. It was not something that they could see or hear, but more of a vague, eerie, oppressive feeling. Although the chain breaker was surrounded by water and had descended deep below the surface of the river by now, none of them could perceive what hid beyond the spinning walls of the twisting tunnel. However, it seemed as if the absolute darkness that surrounded them was somehow growing darker and darker with each hour that passed. Sunny felt a sense of immense threat. Cassie was pale as well. It was as if they were surrounded by terrifying danger from all sides, worse even than it had been in the flowing mist of Alethia's island. However, if there was some harrowing being in the water, it did not enter the tunnel to swallow them whole. Remembering how much the dreadful whirlpool resembled a colossal maw, Sunny could only hope that it was not because they were already in the being's intestines. Maybe whatever creatures dwell in the unfathomable depth simply can't exist outside of water, or maybe the current of the tunnel walls is as dangerous to them as it is to the chain breaker. Calming himself like that, he tried to find distraction in weaving. A few more hours passed. Eventually, Nephi stood up and looked around with a slight frown on her face. "Don't you think that it's getting brighter?" Then the others noticed it too. The darkness seemed slightly less impenetrable now. The process continued. Slowly but surely, the dark mass of water was starting to glow. The darkness was dispelled, and instead, a blinding radiance surrounded them from all sides. It was so bright that Sunny couldn't open his eyes for a while. What's this? The abyssal tunnel was now a tunnel of radiant light. It was as if they were traveling through the depths of a star. "It's the sun's." Sunny was confused by Jet's words at first, but then he understood. Of course. Every evening the 7 suns seemed to dive into the great river, and every night the great river started to glow. Its shine was soft, dreamlike, and iridescent. However, that was on the surface. What would that light look like in the unfathomable depths? They were currently learning the answer. Soon, Sunny's eyes adjusted to the brightness, and he cautiously opened them. The members of the cohort were all frozen still, observing the radiant world around them. It was beautiful, but also harrowing. A moment later, Sunny shuddered and took an involuntary step back. Somewhere out there in the blinding light, a shadow suddenly moved, so colossal that it dimmed the radiance of the water for a few moments. Its size was so immense that he struggled to comprehend it, and its shape. As soon as Sunny tried to ascertain it, it was as if he had lost consciousness for several seconds. When he came back to his senses, the shadow had disappeared somewhere far below, and he was covered in cold sweat. His head was pulsing with a splitting ache. That thing, how far away was it? What was it? He looked at the members of the cohort and found them in a similar state to his, especially Cassie, who was blind, but also saw much more than anyone else. Then the brightness of the water changed once again, as another inconceivable shadow moved through its radiant mass, far in the distance. He shivered. Go inside. Cassie's voice was hoarse. Lowering her head, she sighed and repeated herself. Go inside. Don't return until it's dark again. It's not good for you to stay here. Nephi's looked at her for a moment, then frowned. What about you? We won't leave you alone. The blind girl shook her head. I'll be fine. I won't be able to see anything if you leave anyway, most importantly. She shivered slightly. Nothing will be able to gaze back at me. Go. Sunny knew all too well that some nightmare creatures felt when someone was looking at them. That was why people had to be careful where they turned their eyes in the dream realm, especially in those regions of it where true horrors dwelled. That was why he did not try to dissuade Cassie and silently pulled Nephi's toward the entrance to the lower decks. He recalled his shadows as well. Jet and Effie followed. They spent some time together at the mess deck, but no one was in the mood to talk. It felt as if the smallest sound could be heard by the beings that moved in the depths of the great river. And so, after a while, the members of the cohort left for their cabins and tried to fall asleep. The merciless light bathed the chain breaker for a few more hours, and then grew dim. Finally, it disappeared entirely, replaced once again by absolute darkness. The spinning tunnel continued to lead them down, 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 down into the unfathomable depths. The great river was rumored to be bottomless and surrounded by the darkness. Sunny could easily believe that it was. However, he also felt that if they survived a few more days of the descent, perhaps they would prove the rumors wrong. Traveling through the twisting underwater tunnel was a constant struggle, but strangely enough, it was mostly safe. Just as Windflower had said, as long as the chain breaker did not touch the water, there was little inside the vortex that could threaten them. If the flying ship did touch the spinning walls of the tunnel, though, death was all but guaranteed, not only because of the terrible current and the obliterating pressure, but also because causing even the smallest ripple was going to alert the harrowing beings dwelling in the unfathomable depth of the great river of their presence. Staying away from the walls was not challenging at first, but the deeper they descended, the more perilous that situation became. The tunnel grew narrower, while its twists became more frequent and steep with each passing day. Sometimes, it bent so much that the chain breaker flew forward for a while instead of continuously descending. It was as though they were really traveling through the intestines of an unimaginable beast. Worst of all was the fact that the tunnel was not static. It constantly moved, undulating, making it seem as though the walls of spinning water were pursuing the graceful ship. Perhaps they were. Sometimes the water was shrouded in abyssal darkness. Sometimes it shone with blinding light. Nephi steered the ship in the darkness, but when the depths of the great river ignited with beautiful radiance, Cassie had to take the oars. The rest of them were forced to escape to the interior of the flying vessel, leaving her to face the harrowing shapes moving through the radiant water alone. Anyone would have been shaken and mentally strained by having to endure the horror and pressure of those terrible creatures in solitude. Despite that, Cassie remained calm and seemingly unperturbed. Sunny did not know if that was a good sign or not. What he did know, however, was that they would have never survived the journey through the vortex without the chain breaker. They would have been long swallowed by the great river if Cassie had not repaired the enchantment circuit as well. As it was, Sunny felt that they would, perhaps, make it to the other side of the vortex unscathed. Days passed in tense silence. The deeper they descended, the more palpable the pressure assaulting their minds was. The abyssal darkness was suffocating and the radiant light was dreadful. More than that, at some point the world itself became strange, playing tricks with their minds. Time was growing convoluted and elusive, as if it too was being crushed by the oppressive weight of the water surrounding them. Sunny and Nephi's, who had already experienced something similar in the time storm, were less affected by this strangeness than the other members of the cohort. However, Eventually, they too grew accustomed to the eerie unstableness of time. With time, space had also become unreliable. At first, Sunny thought that it was the chain breaker's flight that had lost its smoothness, making the flying ship shake and shudder from time to time. Sometimes it would jerk, and sometimes it would sway. But then he realized that it was the fabric of reality itself that had become twisted. He understood it while carrying a cup of tea, brewed with the invigorating water of the endless spring, to Nephi's. Usually, a walk from the lower deck entrance to the stern would have taken him less than a minute, and a few dozen steps. However, this time, Sunny counted at least several hundred steps before reaching the runic circle. The tea he was carrying was still hot and steaming, though. That is not good. He stared at the teacup in his hand, then at Nephi's, who was steering the ship without seemingly having noticed anything strange. What if it was not the deck that had been stretched like a rubber band, but one of us? What if the space between the ship and the walls of the tunnel suddenly contracted? Suddenly, the surrounding darkness seemed much more terrifying. But there was nothing any of them could do about it. Worrying about being torn apart by fractured space was not going to do him any good either. So, Sunny distracted himself by concentrating on weaving. After around 7 cycles of darkness and light, he couldn't tell exactly how many because of how strange time had become. He successfully altered the capacious chest, enchantment of the covetous coffer to allow it to store living beings. He had not copied the weave of a supreme memory, but rather borrowed a few elements from it. Sadly, it was a futile effort. Sunny might have changed the weave of the enchantment to remove the limitation on inanimate objects, but he was nowhere near knowing how to integrate a livable space into the chest's storage space. There was no meadow, no forest, and no river inside of it, which meant that there was also no light, no water, and no air there. There was nothing at all. So, unless he wanted a living being to suffocate to death, placing them inside was out of the question. Theoretically, he was able to hide his shadows in the covetous coffer now, since they did not need to breathe. However, Sunny struggled to imagine why he would want to do such a thing, maybe to punish them for misbehaving. He did not share these thoughts with the shadows, but they still started to avoid the toothy chest for some reason. Time slowly passed. Or maybe it was passing quickly. All Sunny knew was that the depths of the great river seemed more and more dreadful each time he looked into the abyssal darkness. Even Cassie was starting to look unnerved. The tunnel was not getting narrower anymore. However, its twists and turns were becoming wilder. And then, one day, the chain breaker seemed to stop. Sunny was startled as the familiar feeling of motion completely disappeared. Standing up from where he was sitting, he noticed the other members of the cohort looking perplexed. Then he heard Neff's stifled yelp. Looking at the stern, he saw her gripping the steering oars so hard that her hands had turned white. She was moving both oars in a strange manner, not slowly and smoothly, like usual, but instead forcefully and with a sense of urgency. What the hell? Why was Nephi's even moving the oars if they were standing still? Looking at the walls of the tunnel, Sunny flinched. The walls had turned into a blur. The chain breaker was frozen in place, but the tunnel itself was flying past it at tremendous speed. The twists and turns that Nephi's had been cautiously navigating were now flashing past them, forcing her to steer the ship as fast as she could, and much faster than that, even if they wanted to survive. Doesn't make any sense. Sunny was confused for a moment. How could the flying ship both remain in place and be steered around the bends of the tunnel? It was as if the world itself was being spun and moved by Neff's hands. But then again, when was the last time the world made any sense? Perhaps the static position of the chain breaker was simply a matter of perspective. Perhaps they were simply being carried by some unfathomable, eerie force. What did it matter? The only thing that mattered was for Nephi's to guide them through the swiftly moving tunnel. And she did. Completely focused, she guided the chain breaker, not allowing the water to swallow it. A minute passed, then another, then another. Then an eternity. Suddenly, the tunnel disappeared. Something flashed, blinding Sonny, and was then replaced by darkness. He could feel motion once again. In fact, he could feel a lot of motion. It was as if the chain breaker had been shot from a catapult. Their speed was so dreadful that he was instantly blown back a dozen meters, and only managed to remain on the ship by clutching at the railing. Damn! Sonny felt a tremendous force pushing him back, and a hurricane wind crashing into him with primal fury. All he could do was grit his teeth and hold on for his dear life. Slowly, their speed decreased. Nephi's, who had been pressed into the apluster, pushed one of the oars and rolled the ship. It was only then that Sonny realized that the chain breaker had been flying upside down. As the flying ship revolved around its axis, Sonny fell on the deck and weakly picked himself up. It seemed that they had escaped the vortex. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.